during the civil rights movement. So this DEI is not new, and it's evolved certainly over many years. And I can think back to the time that I spent a lot of effort when it was really emphasized around multiculturalism. And where we are today is just yet another evolution of it. But I would point out, and for as much work as I did with the Multicultural Affairs Congress and how, in fact, those markets were very lucrative, society is changing. And I would point out that probably one of the most diverse markets that we all should be paying attention to is Gen Z and the tail end of millennials. They are the most diverse generation we've ever had. And if we are looking at, well, what's the next iteration of growth and business opportunity in tourism, you should be looking at Gen Z. By 2025, between Gen Z, millennial, as well as Xers, that's 85% of those who work in our industry. By then, 2025, boomers will probably represent maybe about 10% of it. So the growth in where we should be looking in terms of where business opportunities are is certainly in those younger generations. And I would also point out there's a study that was done by Expedia that says the Gen Z is more interested in paying for a higher price point of an inclusion experience than some of the other generations, just because that has really become a true part of their DNA. But for us, as we've worked all across the country, and I still feel very much heartbroken by the lack of representation of diverse leaders, is that there are a number of allies who are trying to make differences in their locations and within their organizations. And I think as we continue to help educate and provide best practices and strategies, we can maybe begin to see a growth of what that number could be. I also want to point out that it is about supporting those businesses in both Florida and Texas. I'm in Miami, I'll be back in Tampa, and I'll be back in the Palm Beaches later this month to really support those who are the foot soldiers in those communities, because we can't turn our back on those businesses, and we have to encourage for those who are trying to make a difference in their community to know that they have a connection. We can't just leave them out on that particular island. So it is a challenge right now, but I think it is about understanding evolution of what DEI is and understanding how it plays an important part in terms of business development, business strategies, and allowing for individuals to show that there is a benefit associated with this.
Okay, thank you. Well, as we've heard earlier, I think if I remember correctly, the number of African Americans in leadership positions in the lodging industry is less than 2%. Is that what you said? 2.2. 2.2. Okay. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, also there are only 10 or 11 African Americans running convention and visitors bureaus. Danella reported about the cruise industry is not any better in the airline industry. The question is, what can we do about that? What can the average traveler do? What can the average meeting planner do to bring pressure on the industry to make a change? Because everybody talks about, well, most people talk about diversity ever since George Floyd murder, but very few are taking any action steps. So what are some of the action steps that should be taken both by people in the industry and those who are traveling and planning meetings or travel agents? What are some of the things that could be done?
I mean, I think the biggest thing right now is centered upon education. I just recently came back from Destinations International, and their Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee was really focusing on how we can provide more and more resources to those leaders within organizations so that they can be more active. We know that the kind of legislation that is presented makes it very difficult to do the kind of work that we do. So part of that education is for leaders to know how they can look at either what legislation exists and what they can do to impact that. And if there are legislations being proposed, how they can use some of the best practices that perhaps do not exist in some of those where it is approved, but where it's been stopped, in order to maintain the effort. Because we've never been as successful probably as we should be as an industry, emphasizing the economic impact that we bring. Even after it was clear that we are a social society, and during COVID, one of the things that people missed more than anything was to be able to go out and have dinner or go on vacation. And the reality of it is that for us to be amongst the third largest industry, that we have to emphasize our economic impact and what it means to the small, medium, and large destinations. But it is about being very participative, being very educated, and understanding how, as leaders, we do have influence. And you know, some destinations have a better connection with their corporate community and their legislators than others. And to that degree, it's maybe working through that angle in order to create change.
I think I think the meeting planners need to challenge destinations. I remember back when Connie was talking about Miami having a very difficult time, I was working in hotels at the time, and we were trying to get the NAACP convention to Miami. And oh my God, that was like applying for a PhD. They challenged and challenged. They wanted to know how many executives, how many people were on the front line, how many people were just line people. They wanted to know who was where, their titles and everything. I think we need to challenge destinations. I have seen, since this DEI has now become very focused, that certain groups are requesting that information and aligning themselves with the destination that can come up with it, that they can answer, they can showcase that yes, we have executives, we have people on our board, we have people in our community that are ethnic background, and that can align with what you're trying to achieve coming to the destinations. So challenge, ask, insist, and spend your dollars where the people look like you.
Yeah, to piggyback, I was thinking the same thing back in our years with the National Coalition of Black Meeting Planners, then professionals now. It was part of many RFPs.
Yeah.
That information had to be submitted when a city would bid on a convention. So, you know, we're again getting back to some of that information. And then also education. Greg mentioned about DI, but there's a couple of levels with Destination International, which is really destination management organizations and affiliates. There now is an HBCU scholarship that was formed, and a lot of us were a part of that to help students who want to get in the hospitality industry. So some of it is also having resources for things of that nature. In Miami, we lead a program called the Black Hospitality Initiative, which is about students wanting to get in the industry. And so we have a full scholarship, talent development career program. And some of you yesterday may have heard from Dr. Gregory Woods, who was here, who leads that program. So it's a couple of things. All of us are accountable in this spectrum. And I do want to give kudos to Andy Ingram, who always pushes that students are here as part of this conference, because you know, our industry has a perception, and I think it's getting away from it a little bit more, of service. Service is great. So number one, we should encourage service, but a lot of times they only see certain level positions, and I think more and more the students coming up need to see positions in a different level so that they can also be attracted or know they can work their way up to where they want to be.
Absolutely, Connie, and I just want to piggyback on that. Yeah. You know, in the tourism industry, when I first got into tourism and hospitality, and I was working for Hilton Worldwide. Now, I was on the global marketing team launching the Hampton brand all over the world, in Europe and Latin America and all these places. But it was interesting when I worked for Hilton and when I started in the cruise industry, especially to older Black Americans, when I would say who I work for, they would go, They didn't realize I was in a senior leadership or executive position at the time. The assumption was, oh, she must work in the restaurant. Maybe she's a waiter coordinator. You know what I mean? So even in our community, we did not have the foresight because we didn't see people that look like us in these executive leadership positions. You know, in the cruise industry, there's every position you can imagine. Cruise ships are like a country. You know what I'm saying? There's everything from the CEO at the corporate level to the head legal counsel at the corporate level, head of marketing, and then even throughout the organization. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize this, but let me say, there is even a mortuary on cruise ships. There are doctors on cruise ships, right? There are estheticians, and you know what I mean? There's every career. So for the students in the room, you can have any career you want, you know, in the hospitality and tourism industry. It is endless. But we definitely want you to put your sights on seeing that there is a career path. And you see, it's because of people like Saul and Gloria and Andy that gave us Black voices and faces a platform, right? And showcased us to the tourism and travel industry. And then others started to take notice. It's because of them. They paved the way for me, for Connie, for Max, for Greg, okay? And we are now here to help open those doors for all of you and to help lead you on that career path. So take advantage of all of us that are on this stage, because we know the path. And as they say, in some cases, we know where all the bodies are buried too. So we can help you avoid some of the pitfalls.
Well, thank you very much. You know, it's interesting, when we first started our publication, there was only, shortly after we started, there was just the first African-American president of a convention and visitors bureau. That was Melvin Tennant in Oakland, California. He was the first in all these hundreds of years of travel and tourism. That was the first African-American. And actually, he's still active today. He's the president and CEO of Meet Minneapolis. And one of the people who's, I don't know if she's in the room now, Brenda Scott Savage, but she's receiving an Apex Award at the luncheon today. She was the first Black female president and CEO in Mobile, Alabama, of all places, you know. And she told us, we were on the cruise last night, and she told us some stories last night that would just, you know, curl your hair. Just the opposition she got and the people who tried to take her down, but she had the support of the mayor, and with his backing, nobody could really touch her. She stayed there as long as she wanted to, and as long as she could contribute. But I think, you know, we still have a little bit of time left. I like to talk about what are some of the things that you think we could do, either from the DMO side or from travelers. Like we had an interview yesterday with what is the gentleman's name? Gloria from was it Dale from Fort Lauderdale.
Dale Holness.
Yeah.
Former mayor.
Yeah. And he was talking about, you know, it's really important that what kind of people you vote into office. You know, there was a gentleman in Fort Lauderdale, Al Tucker, who was a dear friend of ours and just was such a advocate for this market segment. He's unfortunately transitioned a year or two ago. But so, you know, we need to be more intentional in terms of the kind of people we elect to office, especially what's going on here in Florida right now with the legislature. So what are some of the things that travelers can do, that individuals can do who are in the industry to make some changes? Because, you know, what's happening right now is unacceptable, you know, from my point of view, and from a lot of, you know, this is a hospitality industry, and yet I have this thing that I say from time to time, that the hospitality industry is not very hospitable to Black people and people of color. So what can we do to change that?
I mean, I think legislatively it's important that we now realize that even being a part of your school board is extremely important. And a lot of the influence that has really developed for those who are making decisions was because they attended a school board meeting and they decided to run for committee, and they became a chair, and then they leveraged that towards being involved in city council. But understanding the process, like we have to be involved. Some of the issues are just simply because there was a very passive approach to something as granular as being at a home and school association meeting and voicing your opposition, or deciding that I should be on a committee. I mean, we all know that at the end of the day, your ability to influence organizations is to go beyond membership. It's, you know, being a very active committee, perhaps being a committee chair, a board chair, and leveraging that in terms of how you grow within that organization and make a difference. But certainly what we've seen is that it's been a very grassroots effort, and I would say as it relates to our industry and those who are trying to make a difference, it's being much more participative. We have a number of people who are in our industry who have children, who are in schools, they're attending colleges, and there's so many opportunities for us to get involved within those organizations and make change and have a voice of opposition. It's difficult to make that change if you've just taken this very passive approach to just observe, and then by the time the bills are being presented or people are so well appointed that you, even with your opinion, can't make a difference. So I would say that we have to become much more aware that even by being a member of the Home and School Association and positioning to take a role within the school board can go a long way. I recently became a trustee for a charter school, and I have to tell you, the kind of influence that you have is amazing in terms of curriculum development, the kind of education that you want kids to have as they look forward in terms of their career. And you know, you'd like to say there's a silver bullet, but the reality of it is it's about being engaged and it's about being very participative. But I did want to say it's important for us to know that this is not going to get fixed, right? This is something that we have to continue to stay in the fight, and we know that this has gone on for a long time. You know, I've been fortunate to come to Andy's conference for a number of years, and I'm always inspired by the stories that I hear. And I would just encourage for those who have been in the fight and those who are getting in the fight to realize that we just have to make sure that we stay engaged and we move forward with our involvement.
I'd like to piggyback on that, volunteer, because a lot of times we're not going to be appointed or asked or selected to be on committees. Just volunteer. If there's something that's going on out there, raise your hand and seat yourself there and ask questions and challenge, because that's the way you're going to get noticed and answered. And sometimes I volunteered for a committee the other day, a DEI committee. And then we were to have another meeting. And strange enough, I'm a volunteer on this committee. And my opinion was asked to give my opinion for the agenda for the next meeting. That's how important it became, because when I spoke up at the first meeting, my questions were heard. They were listened to, and they were like, okay, let's not get ourselves in this situation again. Let's see what Maxine has to contribute. So just volunteer, show up, raise your hand, be aware, and make a difference.
So there's a saying, you know, you've heard the saying, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready thing. So it's a couple of things. You have to control the controllables. So one, we have to vote, and we have to encourage voting, and we have to look at candidates that support things in our world. They may not support things directly to, say, a hotel or this, but they may in general support things in the entertainment field or the film field, which tells you that they probably will understand some of the other things. So I think that's important. I think that we all learned after COVID that we have to have other ways to do business when things like that shut down. Now, that was a major thing. We hope nothing like that happens again anytime soon. But honestly, these travel advisories and things of that nature can affect in somewhat the same way as a COVID, because it will impact how we do business. So I think that, you know, businesses should also look at their business plan and things that they're doing. We lead a program, Tourism Business Enhancement, that Petra Brennan, who is here, will talk about in a session a little bit later, but it's also a way that we at the Bureau work with small businesses to capacity building and tourism related things. And those are things that we've been doing. So I think that you have to prepare that things like this are going to happen. Like Greg said, some of this is not going to go away, so you have to control what you can control. And then the last thing, we're going to be launching a campaign called Brought to You by Tourism. And one of the things, you know, this challenge, sometimes the greater world doesn't understand tourism, how it affects all levels. And so we're launching this campaign so that our community can have a better understanding, so that then when some of the things that we need to move forward are there can be even more support in those areas, which goes back to we can't be siloed. We need to diversify our touch and our reach, because tourism really impacts the whole community.
Okay. One of the things that I'd like to add is that there are several organizations within the industry that, if you haven't not affiliated with them, you ought to explore the possibility of joining and participating and following up on Greg saying volunteering, getting on some committees. One of them is the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals, which has been mentioned several times. And actually, the founder of that organization, Howard Mills, who is no longer with us, but he is responsible in great part for us launching Black Meetings in Tourism magazine. Mm-hmm. He encouraged us over the years to do it, and after we had an experience where one of the general market publications kind of twisted a story that was taking place and didn't tell, you know, the story the way it actually happened from an African American perspective. Mm-hmm. He told us it's time for us to have our own publication so we could tell our own stories and not to depend on other people to do it for us. So the coalition is one. There's another organization called Travel Professionals of Color, but they're primarily travel agents and tour operators. But they are very active in the industry, and that's if you're interested in leisure travel and that's an area that you're thinking about, you should certainly explore the possibility of joining that organization. They just had a conference recently on a cruise ship. I forget. I'm not sure where they went, but and then of course there's NABHOOD and the International Multicultural Tourism Network. Those are the main organizations that have activities that would be of interest to you and that could help you in furthering your career. So by all means, look into the possibilities, and some of them have chapters in other parts of the country. And of course, there's also some of the general market like MPI. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that MPI just their new president is African American. Yeah. Yes.
And then also, Saul, I want to add, when you look around in the industry, if you don't see you or people like you, create you. So when my position was affected in the cruise industry, and I was sitting at home thinking on, lockdown, what am I going to do next? I thought about who were the faces of travel television shows. And of course, you had Samantha Brown, who's been around for over 20 years. You had Rick Steves, who's been around for over 20 years. And then, of course, rest in peace, you had Bourdain. But you didn't see a Danella Richard. You didn't see anybody who looked like me. So it was during COVID that we launched the television show, Traveling with Danella, and it was really just to keep people inspired that when borders open, we would travel the world again. Even here in Miami, we're on lockdown, right? Where we didn't even have a lot of people in hotels, and even on the beaches, we had restrictions. Connie was one of the first people on my show, right? As soon as we could welcome tourists back, right? And so it really started just to inspire people to travel again. And I was going back to my executive job in the cruise industry. Well, 3 years later, as those borders opened, all these different countries and destinations started calling, come here, come film. We've been to Europe, we've been to South America, we've been to so many cities. I can, from Miami on to Milwaukee to Boston, Beaufort, South Carolina. And today, we are on, here in Miami, Sundays, 10 a.m. on the CW, NBC, Seattle, Saturday nights, right before Saturday Night Live. Several other nationally syndicated cities throughout the U.S. We're on Tubi. If we're not locally in your city, you can watch us on demand on Tubi. We're on Go Traveler, Streamlink, and GFN TV. If you're flying, we're on Kuwait and Turkish Airways. And if you're in the military, we're in 168 countries on American Forces Network. Create you if you don't see you. This is how Traveling with Danella was born.
I gotta say this. I gotta say two things. I know I'll never get back at the rate when Danella called me during COVID and said, hey, Connie, I'm starting this show. And I said, yes, we'll do it. But this is true. Talked to her about reinvention, because now I get this, wow, I was on American Airlines, Connie, and I was looking and I saw you on that show. And I was like, yeah, that was Traveling with Danella. I mean, she literally got on American the first year. Within the first year, she was, what do you call that?
In-flight television.
In-flight.
In-flight TV.
And so kudos to you. I just had to say that.
See, I made her a star.
She did.
You know, I do want to go back, though, because you had mentioned a number of great organizations that are actually in our business.
Yes.
But we should also take into account organizations like Divine Nine. And
Yes.
they are so important because of the economic impact that they bring when they book their meetings and conventions. So as we are thinking in terms of how we can make the connection to provide influence around what we do with meetings and conventions, I would certainly say that we need to embrace all of our Greek fraternities and sororities, because they make a huge difference when they bring their conferences, their conclaves to those cities. And then others, such as the Black MBAs, which is significant when they come in, or National Black Accountants, or the Black Journalists Association. I think it's important for us not to lose sight that those are the groups that fill those need periods that hotels desire for occupancy and revenue when they can't get it out of other general markets. So it's not just the organizations that are specifically in our business, but it's the ones, quite frankly, that bring the business. So I did just want to point that out, because that was a good point that you made.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Andy has warned us that we better stop on time. And we're under 2 minutes, so I'm going to ask everybody if they would like to make a closing statement. I actually was going to open the floor up for some questions, but we're not going to be able to do that. So, by all means, you're not going to get this opportunity to see these great industry reps. So after this session is over, grab them, and if you have a question, you grab them on the floor and just ask them. But anyway, if you'd like to make a little closing statements.
Sure, I'll start.
Okay.
So we're hosting the Collective Experience. It's our 2023 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference in Philadelphia on October 23rd and 24th. This will be a great opportunity for cross-cultural engagement around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's an academic think tank for academics, as well as a variety of focus around practical issues associated with DEI. We're thrilled to announce that we are presenting our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Award to the NAACP, and we're excited to acknowledge them for not just what they do today, but what they have done all along. It's an incredible opportunity for a lot of those who are in the DEI space right now, because they need to be able to gather to look at some of the challenges that we face and come up with best practices in order to move forward. So we hope to see you in Philadelphia in October.
On the same vein, in the Palm Beaches, we are hosting a DEI conference. When is it? The end of August?
I'll be there.
Yes. Greg will be participating, and I'm sure Connie will be attending. And if you're local and in the area, we are so welcome to attend at the Palm Beaches Convention Center on August 30th and 31st.
And I'll just say, if you don't see you, create you. And follow me at Traveling with Danella on Instagram. And watch us on Tubi.
Miami, check us out. You can go directly to Multicultural Miami. If some of you all are looking for some ideas, or just honestly going to be here and get out and about, go to multiculturalmiami.com. Also, August is Nationally Black Business Month, and you'll see some content on there promoting Black Business Month. And last I'll say is, just keep pushing, And I just want to thank on behalf of our group, Saul and Glow, again, Andy, for your commitment and support of us over these years. We are here in part because of you, so thank you so much.
Well,
Volunteer on that board. Show up, ask questions, be persistent.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance, and thanks to this wonderful panel for their sharing their expertise and their wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much to our panelists. An executive tourism forum, a discussion on diversity in tourism and the impact to the destination